Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Colleen Tauke, and I'll be your host for this live Q&A on National Sewing Circle. Our guest today is Nicki LaFoille. Welcome, Nicki.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
For the next hour, Nicki will be answering live viewer questions submitted by you. So if you're watching on the website, you can submit your question in the chat box below. And if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, submit your questions in the comments section, and then they'll relay those to us. Before we start, make sure to grab the free downloadable pattern for our fall table runner project, and you can do so by clicking on the banner below or finding the link in our video description. Okay, Nicki, so what have you been working on as fall starts to slide in here real quick?
As the weather starts to change here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, it starts and this winter especially, it's been getting cold really fast. So like we're not outside as much. So I've, inside time to do sewing stuff. So it's a really great time to sew and make projects and the cozy kind of projects that you want on, cold fall days. So I actually have, I'm making a cape for my daughter. That's kind of like a costumey type cape. It's a hooded cape.
Oh.
And I'm going to do a video on it for the National Sewing Circle website because I'm going to film some videos pretty soon. So I'm working on, a lot of that kind of work sewing stuff. And of course, always still sewing masks. So, that's
Of course.
it's always there.
So is your daughter going to do a little modeling of her cape as you work on it and finish it?
Yeah, she loves to be involved in the sewing process, especially when I'm sewing something for her. So that's actually a good way to get kids started learning how to sew is get them excited about a project and just
Mhm.
let them see, how the process works. So yeah, I had her up in my sewing room and I was measuring her and she's like picking out fabric from my stash and made a huge mess of my sewing room, but it was fun for her to go through all of my fabric. So yeah, she loves being up there and being part of the process. And she's 6, so I haven't let her, drive the machine yet. But we had a hand sewing lesson the other day, just showing her like how to hold the needle and take little
Mhm.
stitches. I had lines on the fabric, so she's starting to get a feel for it, and
Okay.
she's very interested in it. So having fun fabric that's fun for kids is a great way to get them excited about a project. So yeah,
Very good.
she's excited for her new cape.
Well, you're probably making memories for a lifetime because I do remember in kindergarten getting to cut out my very first pattern. Mom didn't let me go to the machine yet, but to get to cut it out and then watch it come to actual be a garment that I could wear to school,
Yeah,
never forget that. So
yeah, magical.
okay, we got a question. This came in from Carmela, and she asks, I need help with using the right type of interfacing, matching the fabric types with specific materials, and the importance to use the right interfacing. So, how do you decide which one is the right product for your project?
Yeah. So it can be very subjective, the right type of interfacing, because it all depends on the project that you're doing, its intended use. So interfacing for like collars and cuffs, um, doesn't need to be real stiff. You can use like a featherweight, which is what I like to use because I don't really like super stiff collars. So I just use a featherweight interfacing just to give it a little bit of stability, a very small amount of stiffness. If you like super stiff collars, or if you're doing something like my mind is on costumes right now, if you're doing something costumey like a big Dracula collar or something, you would need a stiffer interfacing. So I would do like a medium weight interfacing for something that you want to, be able to stand up on its own. Um, if you're interfacing behind buttonholes or behind a zipper opening, that doesn't require anything really stiff, just something to give a little bit of stability to that fabric behind those stress points. of garment openings. So like a lightweight interfacing would probably be enough for that. And you do, to some extent, want to match the interfacing weight to the weight of the fabric you're putting it on. So if you're using like a really lightweight kind of lawn or something that's kind of thin and flowy, you don't want to use a real stiff, crisp, like midway interfacing. You want to, match that so it doesn't lose the hand of the fabric that you're working with. So a lawn, I would use a lightweight interfacing or even featherweight, depending on where it's going, of course. So yeah, you can go from featherweight interfacing to lightweight to midweight up to like a heavyweight, and even that craft Peltex, that really thick, like stiff, like craft interfacing. That is great for using in bags. So bags is like a whole other ball game. You do want to use a really, if you want a stiff bag that can stand up on its own, you'll want to use, I'm actually making a backpack for National Sewing Circle video, and I'm using a mid-weight interfacing with like a mid-weight kind of canvas fabric so that it will be stiff and stand up on its own. But I have made purses before where I haven't even used interfacing at all because I didn't want it to be real stiff and crisp. I wanted it to kind of drape with me as I was wearing it. So it is subjective as to what type of interfacing you're using. But I recommend trying them out. Get little bits of each weight of interfacing and use them on the back side of your fabric to see how it will affect the fabric. Because that's really the only way you can, get a feel for it, get an idea of how they play together, is to get it in your hands and feel it and see it and move it around. So I hope that gave you a little primer on interfacing.
Very good.
I have about interfacing. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, it does take kind of using them and trying them a little bit, or even on the scraps after you've cut something out and you haven't determined yet what to use. Put some onto the scraps and see what it's going to feel like. If it's giving you enough structure or too much structure. I've even gone to the point where I didn't have access to a heavier weight one, and I used 2 layers.
Yeah.
Of a midweight, so that it made it more structured in the end. So there's a lot of ways to get the structure and the shape that you're looking for when you're using interfacing. So
yeah, absolutely.
Try them all. Okay, the next question is from Catherine, and she asks, do you have a favorite mask problem or pattern out there? Right now, everyone is still making masks and thought they were done, and then they were like, oh, but we love these other fabrics, so we got to try some, we're going to make some more. So do you have a favorite pattern?
I do. I like the kind of mask that, you have your center seam here, so it kind of curves and it's very fitted. Mine goes kind of up over my nose. So it's not the fold type, like the surgical mask. It's very, it's got that curve shape and the seam in the center, and it goes under my chin too. I wish I had it with me, but I don't have it right here. But it's very fitted, and people have told me, because I've been giving them away and selling some, people have told me that they don't fog up their glasses, which is like huge. It still fogs up my glasses. I don't know if it's like my face shape or what it is, but mine still get fogged up. But it's a good shape for some people. And that mask pattern, I just drew it.
Okay.
And I did a video on masks earlier this year for National Sewing Circle, and I don't know if the pattern is available with that video. You can check on nationalsewingcircle.com. It's called, I think, flu mask or something. Flu mask. Something like that. It might be available there, but yeah, that's the style that I prefer, and I just shrunk it down to make one for my daughter too. And again, that's a good project for her to pick out fabric forks. You can just use scraps, and it's really easy and very adjustable because I make the sides. I don't sew the elastic into the sides. I tunnel on the side so that the elastic just can get threaded through. So you can do elastic loops, different sizes, or you can even thread one long through both of them and have,
Oh.
have it go around the back of your head and then have it like tie on the bottom. So
Mhm.
depending on what you prefer, because I know some people, if they have to wear them for a long time, it will bother them behind their ears if they have to do ear loops. So having that tunnel in the sides instead of, sewing them in gives you some flexibility as to how you're wearing it.
Sure. They do need to be fitted over the ears and not too tight, but not too loose. So
Yes,
keep everyone safe and everyone healthy. That's the idea, right?
absolutely.
Okay, we have a question from Jenna, and she asks, "What do you recommend getting when getting a new machine? My machine has a bunch of little problems like tension and bad bobbins. What do I need to know if when I go to look for a new machine?"
Okay. So yeah, if your machine is having problems like tension issues and you go to sew on it and nothing you do can make a good stitch, um, you can go through um, the tension checklist, make sure you've got a new needle, make sure it's threaded right, make sure it's clean, especially under the throat plate, get all the lint and dust that's built up in there, get that all out of there. um, Sometimes if you have the type of machine where you load the bobbin into the little thing and then it pops in,
The bobbin.
sometimes there can be issues there with bobbin tension. So there's that little screw that you can adjust, and sometimes that can alleviate tension issues if you loosen that up just a tiny little bit. You don't need to turn that screw very much to change your bobbin tension all that much. Um, but if none of that stuff works, it might be just something got kind of, if you've ever like dropped that little bobbin case or hit a pin with your needle, sometimes that can just like shift and shove off your timing enough that it just kind of screws up the inner workings of the machine. So you can go bring it into a dealer or a sewing machine repair and see if that is something that needs to be repaired, or if you're ready to upgrade anyway, that's a good time to be like, well, it's not really worth it to take it to the sewing machine doctor and just think about getting a new one and upgrading, because um, machines, you can get a good machine for, not that expensive. And, if you have, over the course of your sewing career, if you've graduated to, you want more features, or you've figured out that you want to branch off more into quilting rather than sewing, there are machines that have specific features to make that easier for you. So there are some machines that have um, a bigger opening here between the arm, so that you can fit, you can roll up your quilt and like fit it in there. So you can do a little bit more of that type of stuff, or whatever project that you have. If you're sewing like big bags or something, having a bigger space there can be helpful. Um, so if you're shopping for a new machine, you want to think about the types of projects that you do and where you want to go with your sewing. Um, but I used a brother machine, the first two machines I used. And the first one was, I was a poor college student, so I went to Walmart and I got an $80 machine, and I used that for many years, and it worked fine. And then I got like the next step up of brother machine. And now I have a FOF. This is the Passport 2.0, and I love this machine so much. I'm going to plug it for just a minute because this is a great machine. I think it runs like, I forget if it's 700 or 800. So it's noticeably better in quality than my previous ones, which I didn't invest a whole lot of money into. But most of the machine companies have they have a wide range of machines, starter machines, and then, the upgraded to like the thousands of dollars machines, like spend more on your sewing machine than you do on your car type machines.
That's possible.
Yeah. So it all depends on where you're at, how much sewing you do. If you're a professional, you might want something that, which has all the bells and whistles. I really like that this Passport 2.0 isn't super computerized. To change my stitch, I select the stitch. See if I can turn. So this shows you what the stitches are, and then you select the number of stitch there. And I've got like 5 different buttonhole stitches. I've got a bunch of decorative stitches, which I use only sparingly. It's normally a straight stitch, a zigzag stitch, or like a triple stitch or something. And that's like pretty much all I use. But it's got the IDT foot, which is the big thing that I love. It's that little black thing on the back of the presser foot that comes down and hooks under the foot, and it acts kind of like a walking foot.
Mm-hmm.
That built-in walking foot that helps the layers feed evenly, which I always have engaged. It's just always on, and I love it. So yeah, this machine does everything that I need it to. But if you're in the market for a new machine, I know it may not be possible now. I would always recommend going into a dealer to drive the machine, or go into Joann's or wherever, and like look at it and touch it and sew on it if at all possible, because that can give you a feel for just how it feels, how it works, how sturdy it feels. And you can see all the features. But short of going and actually sewing on it in person, reading reviews is like the next best thing that you can do. So I think I bought my last machine on Amazon because it was a bestseller, because it was so affordable and the reviews were good. So reading what other people had to say about, the, how it runs, and the feet that it comes with, and the things that are good about it and the things that are not good about it, that helps you make a good decision on what machine to get. So also, if you do buy your machine online, please do write a review, because that can help the next sewist, make their decision on what to get. So writing reviews is helpful to the sewing community at large. But yeah, that was a long answer to circling back to the actual question. Yeah, if you do everything that you can think of to fix those tension issues, and whatever snags are happening in your machine, if you can't find the problem, it might just be something inside that's off. And if it's not worth it to get that fixed for you, there comes a time when it's beneficial and better to just get a new machine rather than get your old one fixed, depending on where you're at.
Exactly. We don't keep our cars forever. So, or even our mixers in our kitchen, we don't keep forever, or the refrigerator. So at some point, it's nice to upgrade to a different machine.
Yeah,
And
at some point they do wear out,
exactly. The one thing that I will stress is that most people don't take their machines in to have them cleaned and greased very often. And that can be the crux of the problem sometimes. Sometimes all it needs is a day at the sewing machine spa,
Yeah.
and then everything. And then when you get it back and you turn it on and you sew, you're like, oh, you just sew so nicely now. It just purrs again. So try that. And in most places, at least where I live in the Midwest, if I were to take a machine in that wasn't worth fixing, the tech would tell me. And so, that way your machine has lived a good life, and maybe it's time to move on. So
retire it.
Exactly. Okay, we have a question from Carolyn. She has a question about face masks pattern, mask patterns again, that she wants to share. And so she's put in the link here at craftpassion.com, has a tutorial on multiple sizes, the fitted pattern that has side casings, a filter pocket, and a pocket for the nose support, the piece that you can put over the top. So that's good information. Thank you, Carolyn. We have a question from Starlin. She says, or asks, have you ever laminated a piece of cotton fabric? If so, how is that done?
Oh, to laminate fabric yourself. I never have. If I wanted laminated cotton, I wouldn't have even thought to do it myself. I would think, "Oh, I've got to go buy laminated cotton." So, I I do not know how that would be done. That's something that I might look into because laminated cotton is great for a bunch of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
for a ton of fabrics, like waterproof cases and makeup bags and all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
fun stuff. But yeah, to do it yourself, I imagine it would entail like vinyl, but I'm not sure how you would make it adhere to the cotton. That's a really good question, Starlin. I might look into that.
Yeah. I know I've heard of a product and I've seen it a few years ago, but I didn't have a chance to actually try it out. And it was for making a waterproof makeup bag, or even like sandwich bags for reusable for a lunch bag,
Right.
to put chips and things like that in so that you wouldn't get oil or water stains. So I know there are products out there. I guess we just have to, it's a new one to look into, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, then we have a question from Jenna. It says, what is a good way to make your own pattern if you don't have a mannequin? You're working with shape.
That is
Hmm.
a good question. Because I make my own patterns. I don't have a mannequin either. So
Okay.
I always start with my base pattern. So whatever, if I'm doing like a skirt or a top, I'll go back to a pattern that I've drawn that has that basic shape. Um, if you if you don't have like a basic pattern, depending on what you're making, you can draw your own, or you can, find a pattern that is kind of similar, and then you can alter it to, whatever you want. But I always work on my patterns just, flat on my cutting board, and it does take a lot of measuring. So you're measuring, different spots on the pattern, keeping seam allowances in mind, keeping that wearing ease in mind. So you have to build in a little bit of ease for wearing it on your body. um, and sometimes I will have to ask for help in measuring myself. um, so if you have somebody around that can help make sure the measuring tape is straight across your back, or measuring your length or your height, that can be helpful to have somebody there to hold the measuring tape. But having you just have to have your body measurements, um, and working from that on that flat pattern. um, that has always worked for me. I've never needed to like drape anything on a mannequin, but it does take it takes some time to lay everything out. I approach it from kind of a mathematical standpoint. You've got your measurements, and it's you line that up on the pattern and seam allowances and ease. um, but it's important to then test that out. So if you're working on the kind of pattern paper that you can like hold it up to yourself and like pin it on yourself, that's a good way to see if where you need extra or less. um, I My pattern paper, I have this huge roll of craft paper, that I won't buy again. It's thick and it's stiff, so I can't do that on myself. So uh, if I want to test my pattern, I have to actually cut it out in a fabric and test it. But you can buy cheap muslin fabric, to make to test your patterns. I wish I could remember the name of the pattern book that I used in college, but it had great diagrams for drawing patterns and altering patterns. So if you can find a resource like that, that's really great to have it, all in one book with diagrams and stuff like that. But yeah, just using it, drawing it out on paper so that you can see the pattern. And having a roll of paper is great because you have, you can draw a dress pattern or pants pattern on a continuous length of paper. I think next time I buy pattern paper, I think I'll probably still buy the craft paper, but I'll buy white paper. I bought the unbleached paper, so it's like brown. It's kind of hard to see the pencil marks, and you can't like see through it, so you can't like trace anything from underneath. So if you're buying pattern paper, I recommend the white paper.
Very good. Have you ever had a garment that you absolutely loved and used that as your pattern?
Yes, that is a great follow-up question and good point. Yes, I have. So that is a great way to get the shape that you want. And that, if you like the way the garment fits, or if that it's a little too tight across the shoulders, then when you draw that pattern, then what you have to add in there. So yeah, laying a pattern out flat. I've done that. I did it for a tank top pattern recently.
Very good.
Which I did for a video on National Sewing Circle. Laying that tank top, fold it in half and lay it out on the pattern paper, and tracing around the perimeter, adding seam allowances. So yeah, if you don't have that basic sloper pattern or that basic block pattern, using something from your closet is a great way to get that shape for sure.
Perfect. Just always remember to add seam allowances, or if it's shorts, skirt, pants, to add if you're going to put elastic or whatever you're going to do for the waistband, make sure you can always cut away, but you can't put it back on.
Exactly. Err on the side of adding too much for sure.
Exactly. You can always trim and tuck here and there. Okay, we have a question from Charlize, and she asks, I'm new to embroidery, but how do I select the correct stabilizer? And I'm an experienced sewer and quilter, but embroidery is something different. So where do we start with that?
Yeah. So embroidery is, it's super fun. It's a great thing to, dip into, to add to your quilts and your other projects for sewing. So stabilizer is to embroidery what interfacing is to like garment sewing, or, your typical home sewing. But the stabilizer is what you hoop on top of the fabric, or below the fabric rather, or you hoop the stabilizer and lay the fabric on top of the hoop, depending on what you're embroidering. And it stabilizes the fabric because, embroidery designs a lot of times will have a lot of thread in them. So they lay down, underlying stitches, and then they get the stitches over top. And sometimes it can be very, very dense. So you need some stabilizer under the fabric to make sure that the fabric doesn't, warp out of shape or just sag. So stabilizer is very important, and it follows kind of the same rules as interfacing in sewing. Is you want to match the right type of stabilizer, or the weight of stabilizer to the weight of the fabric. So if you're using, or if you're embroidering on like a t-shirt, you would want to choose, I would probably do a water-soluble stabilizer. And water-soluble stabilizer comes in like a film variety, which is like plastic wrap kind of. It's a clear film, and it comes in a fabric type variety, which is more what you think of when you think of stabilizer and interfacing. And that stabilizer is called water-soluble because after you're done stitching the design, you can either wash it or just take water, a washcloth with water, and like blot around the edges, and it kind of dissolves from around the edges. So you can leave the stabilizer, depending on what you're making, of course, you can leave the stabilizer under the stitches, or if you're using like a water soluble, you can dissolve it from under the stitches, and that will make the design a little bit more flexible. So if you're putting it on a t-shirt, like on the pocket or on the breast or shoulder area, and you want that embroidery design to not be like stiff and uncomfortable, you want it to like mold to your body a little bit, I would use a water soluble stabilizer so that can dissolve away from behind the stitches after the fact. So there's a heat removable stabilizer type, which, as the name suggests, you put an iron over it and it just kind of dissolves away. So that's good for more lightweight fabrics as well. And then there is tearaway stabilizer, which is good for like stable woven materials. Not too heavyweight, because that tearaway is still kind of, fabric-like, kind of flexible. And you just tear it away from the perimeter of the design because the needle has, perforated it around the edges of the design. And that tearaway stabilizer remains behind the threads of the design for the life of the design. There's also cutaway stabilizer, which is the stiffest and heaviest weight of the stabilizers. At least it was. I haven't done machine embroidery in a couple of years. It was when I worked for Creative Machine Embroidery magazine that I did, embroidery in the office. It's been a couple of years since I've worked there, but so I don't know if there are any new products out there, but the cutaway stabilizer was the heaviest weight last I knew. And as the name suggests, you just cut that stabilizer away from the design perimeter when you're done. And that also remains behind the threads for the life of the design. So if you're embroidering on like a canvas material or even denim, you might want to use cutaway stabilizer to match the weight of the fabric. So that over the life of the garment or the bag or whatever you're embroidering on, it provides stability and strength to not only, the fabric right under the threads, but that area and, around the perimeter of the design as well, so that nothing gets, pulled out of shape. And it just adds, stability to that. So a couple different varieties of stabilizer match to the type of fabric you're using, and, depending on your intended use for that design after the fact, will inform what type of stabilizer to use.
Pretty much when it comes to stabilizers, you could do enough research to become a PhD in stabilizers. So many different kinds, but because embroidery can be used in so many different ways with something that's just an outline versus something that's very densely stitched.
Yeah.
And depending on the fabrics, you're right. You definitely have to kind of look at everything and then find the best outcome. Sometimes you have to stitch a design more than once too. So, testing it out is always a good idea.
Absolutely. Yep. Testing different kinds of stabilizer, just like we were talking about testing the different interfacing to decide what's right for your project.
Exactly. And now that we're at about the halfway point, remember, viewers, to go out and grab that free downloadable table runner project. It's a great beginner kind of project, one that you can make up and have used for the fall season and then enjoy it year after year. So remember that downloadable link should be in the video description or coming into the comments shortly. So you'll be able to see it there. Let's go on. We've got some more questions. They keep coming. Winsome asks, I just got a new blind stitch machine. Does anyone, or do you have or know what's the takeaway on the blind stitch machine? Any newbie tips for this machine? So,
a blind stitch machine. I don't have one. I've never used one. So I don't have any tips. But if any viewers have used a Rex blind stitch machine, so it's kind of, I don't know what that type of.
A lot of times the blind stitch is used for like hemming, like really nice garments like suit pants and sleeves and things like that. So it's very specific to a nice finished outcome. I have only used the blind stitch on my sewing machine a few times. For some reason, my mother always said hemming had to be done by hand, so I didn't ever venture into machine hemming very often. So, but maybe we have a viewer out there or a listener who can give her some tips.
Yeah.
We have a guest that did comment that heat and bond vinyl iron on from Joann's makes great use for laminating fabrics.
Nice.
So there
Yeah.
is a product out there. Okay.
Good.
That would be fun to try out, especially because getting a laminated or a water resistant fabric is kind of limited in how many are available, and it might give you more options that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And you can match if you're like doing a collection of things, you can
Mm-hmm.
match fabric. Yeah, doing whatever fabric you have rather than, like you said, being limited on the selection of laminated cottons at the store. So that's, of course, there's a product for that. There's a product
Product for everything. Exactly. Okay. We've got a comment from Darlene. She's finally going to attach the binding on a quilt that has been in the closet for 10 years. And the video that was given me the confidence to get it done. Thanks a million. So I don't know if that was you. Were you the one or me? I don't know sure who did the video.
Maybe just the videos in general, but I'm glad that
Getting projects done. That's the goal, right?
absolutely. Check it off the list. I'm so glad.
That's good. Okay. Christina asks, can you suggest where I can begin to learn quilting?
That's
National
great.
Quilt Circle.
Yeah, our sister site, National Quilter Circle, absolutely, which Colleen has done a lot of work for. And yeah, I'm a beginner quilter myself. So maybe, Colleen, that's a better question to ask you.
Yeah, over at National Quilting Circle, we do have a lot of videos and a lot of tutorials to help you. If you are a sewer and you love to use your sewing machine and you have those skills, we can easily convert you to be a quilter over on this side. You just have to, there are a few things to consider. We're going to shrink down your seam allowance a lot. So we're going to shorten your stitch length just a little, and we're going to take away the back stitch and then we can turn you into a quilter in no time. So maybe visit National Quilter Circle and see what some of the videos and the tutorials there will tell you about tools, techniques, the terminology, because we kind of have our own vocabulary on the quilting side, I'm afraid, and we can get you started over there. Okay. We have another question, one from Darlene that says, how do you apply an embroidery stabilizer to baby onesies so stitches don't irritate a baby's delicate skin? That's a good question.
That is a good question. And that's something that comes up a lot for embroidery on garments is how do you make it so that it's comfortable to wear? So I would recommend, like I was talking about, that water-soluble stabilizer. That way you wash the garment after the fact and all of that stabilizer dissolves. So there's nothing left around the perimeter of the design to scratch against the skin. All you have left is the thread. So as long as you're not using like a metallic thread or something that, might be weird or scratchy against the skin, if you're using a regular embroidery thread, should be fine, should be good and soft against a baby's skin. And I would suggest trying to find an embroidery design. If you don't have your heart set on a design already, trying to find a design that's not too dense. You can look at the thread count of a design. Sometimes the file will tell you the thread count. Something, a little bit on the lighter side would be better for a small garment to be more easily, flexible and movable as babies running around doing what babies do. Because a lot of times the designers they'll have a design and they'll make it in different sizes, but they'll just take the big design and they will just scale it down, and they won't remove any of the stitches that may not be necessary anymore for a smaller design. Things just get kind of compact in those embroidery designs. So sometimes there's more thread and more stitches than there really needs to be. But again, you can test out the design beforehand and, shop around for designs too, because different designers, if you find one that you really love their designs and they're really well done, you can trust them to go for whatever designs you want.
Perfect. Very good. I know those are kind of popular right now, the onesies with the little cute designs on the front. I've seen some quilters and sewers I know have been doing those as gifts, so those are really cute
Yeah,
ideas.
they make great gifts for
Mhm.
sure.
Personalized all the way.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a question from Simone. She says, I struggle with this often. What brand do you prefer for tailor's chalk? And then also, what cover stitch machine would you prefer, or do you prefer to use?
I don't have a cover stitch machine. Yeah, I don't think I've ever used one either. So everything that I need to do, I do on my sewing machine. Like we were talking about with the blind stitch machine. I've done a blind stitch like you a couple times on my sewing machine just for those projects that you don't want the stitching line on around the hem. You do a blind stitch and it's very invisible and nice. Um, I don't even use a serger. So for finishing like seam allowances and stuff, if it's not lined, I'll just use my zigzag stitch to finish the edges of my fabric. So everything I need to do, I just do on my machine. Um, and yeah, that does everything I need it to do. But in terms of tailor's chalk, I'm glad you asked this question, Simone, because I love talking about marking methods and chalk pencils and markers and all that kind of stuff. So, there's a variety of chalks and marking pencils out there. And it's like, what do you use? So, I've got this one says white water soluble pencil. So, that's like a chalk pencil and the lid has this, which is like an eraser, so you can like rub it and erase it from the fabric, which is cool. I like that. But you can also just take a scrap of fabric and like rub on your fabric and it'll erase the chalk for you, so you don't really need that. This is another of the same in blue. I bought a pack of, there's white, red, blue. You can have a variety of colors of your chalk, marking pencils, so that no matter what fabric color you're using, you can mark and it'll show up. So this uh, chalk paper, so it's not like a tailor's chalk, but this chalk paper is great for marking for when you've got a pattern pinned onto your fabric and you want to mark, dart lines or any, pattern lines. You've got your pattern like pinned to your 2 layers of fabric. You can slide that chalk paper in between the layers and use your tracing wheel to trace the pattern markings and transfer that chalk onto your fabric along your dart lines or whatever. So I use that a lot, but for lines, like straight lines that I'm just using my ruler to mark on my fabric, this little tool is actually my favorite. So this is a chalk wheel, it says, and it just has loose chalk in here, and you can pull that out and refill it with loose chalk. And at the tip here, it's got this little wheel, the little metal wheel, and you just run that along your fabric, and it just drops, drops little bits of chalk. So it makes a really, really fine line, which a lot of times these pencils, unless you have the tip really, really sharp, you're trying to, mark 3 inches exactly, but the width of the pencil tip, can shift you off just a little bit. So this creates a really, really fine line, which I love about it. So that is one of my favorites. But also, well, there's also like, I've got just a chunk of chalk. And this one is nice because it comes with it's got a little holder, and then in the lid, it's got a sharpener. So you run that through there and it, sharpens the edge of the chalk. So that's a nice one too. But if your fabric is, you're not able to mark on it with chalk or marker or something, like if you're using a really, really fine fabric like a chiffon or a velvet where you don't want to push too hard on the nap, or won't show up on the nap, um, tailor's tacks is a great way to mark pattern markings on your fabric, and that just entails a hand sewing needle, and I use a high contrast thread. So whatever thread that you have, can work. And you do a long running stitch through whatever lines you're trying to mark, or you can do like an X stitch and leave long thread loops. So you clip your loops to get the pattern off, and then separate your fabric layers and clip between the layers. So you've got little bits of thread left in the fabric to mark along your lines. So that's great, like I said, for fabrics that you're maybe afraid to mark on, or markings don't really show up on. So tailor's tacks. So that being said, circling back to the question, I ramble. I don't have a favorite brand for tailor's chalk, but this is my favorite tool. But also, tailor's tacks are a great technique and skill to know.
Exactly. We're always collecting different tools to get to that product that we want. And
Yeah.
we tend to have an arsenal of tools before we're done. I don't think I've ever met a carpenter who only owns one hammer.
Right.
So, what quilter would only have one kind of a marking tool? Because I have an entire drawer full here. So,
Exactly. And it's like the same kind of thing we're talking about with testing out different interfacings.
mhm,
Test out different tools and see what one is your favorite.
exactly. Okay, Carmen has a question. She doesn't get to sew very often, and when she gets to jump into a project, then she feels like she's learning all over again. Do you have a website or any kind of software that you've used, or that you know of someone who's used, that helps in drafting a pattern? And is there one that you would recommend?
That is a good question. In terms of drafting patterns, um, I let's see. It's been a long time since I've used a resource for that. I used to have a book. I wish I knew the name of it, and I'm sorry that I don't. Um, so I can't really recommend a resource for that at this time. Maybe I'll do some research. I'll find the name of that book um, for next time. But um, yeah, there if you find some resources like National Sewing Circle, of course, I'm going to mention, has a ton of great videos, and great videos for beginners. So, every time you go back to your sewing machine, if you need to brush up on anything, you can probably find on National Sewing Circle, the exact technique that you want to learn or you want to brush up on, because there's a ton of videos there. But there's a lot of sewing blogs out there. And let's see, mellysews.com is a great one for, she does a lot of like kids patterns, and she does a lot of great tutorials. So when I'm researching something for myself, like I need to brush up on something that I haven't done since I learned it in college, I'll, type my keywords in, and if I see one of the results was Melly Sews, I'll just click on that first. So her blog is great. Let's see, there's makeit-loveit.com is another one. I was just looking at my bookmarks. So they have a lot of great tutorials as well. I'm not sure if they have any for drafting your own pattern, but you can check that out. And also, any type of, technique that you want to learn, you can type in those keywords in your search bar, and, after you've read through, a number of blogs, a number of times in different posts, you'll get a feel for, you know, who has good tutorials, like good tutorials with good pictures or good videos. And that makes it easier to go and find, a trusted resource for whatever technique that you want to learn. But of course, I'll plug National Sewing Circle because I have a lot of, tutorial videos on there. So I think that they have a lot, a good library of stuff. But thank you for that idea, because maybe next time I go to film tutorials for them, I'll do one on drafting your own pattern. So I'm going to write that down.
Inspiration. You never know where it's going to come from. It's amazing the resources we have at our fingertips now. I mean, it used to be that you were on your own. You to figure it out, or to a friend who sewed and they could teach you. But now we can Google search so many things, and blogs, and YouTube videos, and National Sewing Circle. So, you find people that you like to listen to, that have a similar personality, and then that makes you relax. And then sometimes that even helps just in the memory recall. When you go to sit down and do something, you hear them running in the back of your head, which is a good teacher.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And there's something to be said about how there are so many resources out there. So sometimes if you go to research something, you're clicking around trying to find a good tutorial with good, clear instructions and pictures, and you might get overwhelmed, just in the research process. So, which is why it's great to have a resource that you trust, like National Sewing Circle, who has clear, concise instructions. So yeah, just having, one place that you can go rather than having to, research and scatter.
You can search for a long time otherwise. Okay, we've got just a little bit of time left, and let's see if we can fit in a couple more. Norma is a novice sewer, and she asks, how can I make sure to purchase the correct pattern size for my body type? I usually buy my regular size, but often find that the garment turns out to be too small or too large.
Yeah, so the sizes for patterns can be wildly different. Like, just like you're a size 10 in this brand of jeans, but you're a size 4 in this brand of jeans. It's like whatever that manufacturer has decided is the size is, what they're going to do. So if the pattern has measurements for each size, that's a great thing to, reference against your body measurements. So take your body measurements and try to match it as closely as you can to whatever size, they say the measurement is. And I normally go off of bust size because things like length or hip size even, those are easier, or waist circumference, those are easier alterations to make than a bust alteration, because you've got the shoulders and it affects a lot of different measurements. So if you can go off your bust size and get if one size says bust is 36 and you are like a 36 or a 37, go up. It's easier to shave off some than adding to a pattern. So round up, and and then you can make alterations from there.
Very good. So Karen then asks, when embroidering, so we're switching back over to the embroidery side, I have trouble matching thread from one company to another. How can I match thread colors, know that I'm getting a good outcome?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So thread companies too have their own dye recipes for different colors. So yeah, if you go from Gutermann to Coates and Clark, the dark blue, the closest match that you can find might not be an exact match. So if you're trying to get a really good match and you can't, so I guess my only advice for this is, go to the store that has the widest selection and take your thread spool and try to match. But if you can't find an exact match, if your choices are between like a shade lighter and a shade darker, go with the darker thread, because the lighter is going to show up more. So a darker thread is going to blend better with, you know, the thread that you're trying to match it to. But other than that, that's
there are some conversion. I think if you search online, you may find a listing that may have conversion or comparisons of some of the different companies. Like if it's navy here, it might be midnight over here.
Okay.
And so I think there are some, if you search online, I believe there might be a conversion chart out there that'll get you at least in the ballpark. Because when you say blue, and I work in a shop that carries embroidery thread, that spinner is huge.
Oh, yeah.
Blue is a huge section, and you know, they between a coneflower blue and periwinkle and baby blue, just there's so many variations that, especially if it's something that has a gradation of color in it that creates a shape in the embroidery, then you really want to stay as close to what the original designer had intended to get the. Unless you're going for, you know, modern art, then maybe you'll do your own thing. Okay, we have a question from Jenna. This is a random organization question, but do you have any tips on gathering your cut string?
Yeah.
Vacuuming my room every other day. Yeah.
So the threads that you clip off, thread ends, I seem to gather them all on my shirt just accidentally. And I come downstairs from my sewing room and they like fall off on the floor. And my husband's like, "Have you been sewing again?" Yeah, you can tell. So I have a little sewing, like a little garbage, like a fabric garbage that my grandma made. It's got the rice thing so that it is heavy, so it holds it up, and then the garbage like hangs down on my table. So I always I swipe the threads as best as I can. But something that works real well is if you have like a lint roller. A lot of times, Colleen, you, just roll that over your table or over your fabric, and that can pick up a lot as well.
Yep.
That's a good tool.
Yep. When it comes to small threads, that's okay to vacuum. But if you're doing embroidery and you end up with long threads on the floor, beware. That's hard on your vacuum sweeper. Remember to clean out your vacuum often. I know it gets rolled in there really tight. Okay. Let's wind down with one last question. And we got Elsie asks, I've been sewing for a long time and I want to get into quilting. Is it easy to make patchwork quilt?
That is a great question. It seems like it would be. Like I was talking to Andrea, who's doing the latest quilt block challenge for National Quilter Circle, and she was explaining the project. I was like, wow, that seems like I could totally do that. So, Colleen, tell us about how easy it is to make a patchwork quilt.
Okay, so this is giving me flashbacks of about 18 years ago. A quilt shop that was in a town near where I lived. The person who owned the shop knew that I was a garment sewer and had dabbled a little in quilting. Well, she asked me to make a shop sample, and I brought home this bundle of fabric and a pattern. Mind you, I really didn't know the terminology yet, and it sat on the table for like 2 weeks. And my husband was like, "So are you going to do that project?" And I'm like, "Well, eventually." He's like, "Well, what's your problem?" I'm like, "It has to be flat when I'm done." And I said, "No, I'm a garment sewer. Everything fits around a body. This has to be flat." And that freaked me out.
Yeah, different than what you're used to.
Yeah, it's just a different finished product. Mm-hmm. But once I realized that I have the sewing skill, I had the pressing skills, flat was great because a quilt can fit around anyone.
Right.
It doesn't have to fit. It just wraps around and is like a big hug. So if you have the passion, if you have the interest, if you have the enthusiasm, you will be a quilter.
Yeah. And quilting, really, a lot of skills that you have for sewing will translate to quilting too, because it's a lot of, I know you can get more advanced and do, curved seams and all this, but a lot of it is straight seams, right?
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Straight seams and short seams. And and when you're making a garment, you tend to use one or two fabrics, but in a quilt, you get to use all of them.
Yeah, you get to blend, and it's beautiful in the end. You can do so much with color and blending and making, beautiful works of art, really.
Exactly. It comes down to feeling like it's art, because it's something that it's alive in your head and you get to make it come to life. So like I said, if you have the passion, you can do that. Okay. So we're about out of time. We're at an hour. So it looks like it's time for wrapping it up today. Make sure to grab that downloadable free fall pattern for a table runner. Maybe you can dabble in the quilting a little bit. So that the link will be in the comments or in the video description, so you can click on it there so you can get it. Thanks for watching National Sewing Circle live Q&A with Nicki. Nicki, it was great to be with you today.
Good to be with you, and thank you everybody for watching.
See you next time.